Well, hello, Jeff here. I'm going to give you a little video on pollinating. And so first of all, what is pollinating and why would you do it? I'm going to be using field pumpkins for demonstrating this pollination. The same principle applies to many other types of fruits you might grow. Um, the technique specifically might vary a little bit depending on the anatomy of the flower and so forth. But the idea is to take the pollen from the male part of the flower and get it onto the female part of the flower. And then as the fruit develops, and specifically the seeds in the fruit, they are a mix of the genetics that came from that female part and the male part. And I'll get into that a little bit. Well, why would you do this? First, and the most simple reason is probably you can increase the crop yields. Normally the bees and the other insects and sometimes birds and moths and the list goes on, wind even, may do the pollination for you. But if you want to be certain about it, maybe you don't have good supply of those creatures or pollinators, then you may do that yourself, and it might increase your crop yield. The second reason, second common reason would be if you're going to save seeds. Now I'm gonna, as I said, be showing you field pumpkins, which is in the same species of the squash family as zucchini squash and a lot of the winter squash and some gourds, and you know, the list goes on. So if you would like to keep your seeds, which is something I really encourage you to do, if you grow this squash, you can save seeds from it and grow those seeds next year, but you'll have to use some of the techniques I'm going to show you in this video. Otherwise, what you'll end up with is a grab bag. It doesn't matter what you pollinate the fruit with this year if you're going to eat the fruit, but the seeds in there contain a mixture of the genetics, and the male genetics, the pollen that goes in there, if you just leave it to chance, could be from the zucchini that you're trying to save seeds from, could be from your neighbor's ornamental gourd or the acorn squash down the row. So, you know, saving seeds, usually that's not what you want. It can be fun to experiment with these, but if you want to save zucchini seeds, it's usually because you want to grow zucchinis next year. And again, I mean, I mentioned zucchinis, but you can use this concept to save seeds from any of these squashes. And it's a very simple process with the squashes, as you will see, something that you can easily master. And then the third reason, which is actually why I'm doing it here today, is competitive vegetable growing. So I'm doing a controlled cross, or you could say selective breeding. I'm growing year after year these field pumpkins, and I'm doing a combination of the female plant that grows the pumpkin and the male plant that grows the male flower. I'm putting those together, and then I'm saving the seeds from that fruit to grow next year, hoping to get bigger and bigger pumpkins. Okay, I'm here in the pumpkin patch, and I'm just going to show pollinating a field pumpkin. This is Thursday evening, and I got things kind of set up here. Got my notebook for keeping track of which thing is which, where it is. I've got female blossom, which I just chose for this video. It's not one I'm actually going to keep, but I'll go through the process of pollinating it. So it's Thursday evening, and I'm going to cover this up, this blossom. I just put this cup over the top of it, and that'll keep it from opening up overnight. Okay, here's a male flower. It doesn't have any pumpkin on it. It stands up on a tall stem. And because it's a little bit turning orange, I know it's going to open tonight. So this is the evening before pollinating. And what I'm going to do is collect 3 male flowers like this from the same plant. You can see a few of them in there. Same plant because I want the pollen to all be the same that I'm putting onto the female. So I'll harvest this evening, bring it back tomorrow morning. Okay, here we are in the pumpkin patch, and it's morning, and we're going to do pollination of a female blossom, put some male pollen, the pollen from the male flower, onto the female. So the reason for doing that is to make sure that the genetics are true in the seed. The record keeping may well be the most important part of this, because if you go to all the trouble and you can't remember what you pollinated the pumpkins with, then you're kind of out of luck, because the point is to have seeds in the final pumpkin where you know the genetics. So here's just a brief thing about my system. I have a notebook. This is probably the most important tool that I have right now. And I just have my own note system for keeping track of what's what. This may not show up too well. I'll try anyway. But I have a number that just identifies the pumpkin. The female plant, the one that's got the pumpkin on it, the flower that I'm pollinating. The male, that's where the pollen comes from, which plant that is. And then, where is it on the plant? Because if you've noticed, I've got in this rather large patch more than 20 field pumpkin plants, and the leaves are all grown together. And so I need a pretty good system that tells me where to find that female, because I can spend a lot of time looking for these females, and I might have a number of them to do on any one day. So I'm going to forget where they are by the next morning, which is right now. I've come out in the morning. I'll forget where they are unless I've got a good notation for that. The evening before, when I find all these female flowers, I can just make that notation right there on the spot, and I won't have any trouble finding them in the next morning, and I won't miss any that I need to be pollinating. And then this, I just cut these out of a white milk jug with scissors. I put the number, that's the ID number, on the notebook. And then that just goes in the ground next to the pumpkin. Stick that in there. If you don't have so many plants, you might think you'll remember, but what I found is you'll make quite a few mistakes. You'll forget, oh, was the pollen from that plant or was it from that other plant? So I think developing a good note system and sticking to it is one of the most important things you could do if you really want reliable genetics in your plants. Okay, so there's the female. It's got the red cup on it. I use red cups, preferred. You can use any cup, obviously. Some people even tie them, which I don't like because it takes a lot of time. And also I think the flowers are very fragile, so you end up breaking some petals, and I always worry that if I'm tying it, that there might be some way an insect can get in there. Seems to me the cups are foolproof. But the night before, I went out there and I put the cup over the female before it was opened, and I've shown you that too. Now in the morning, that female flower really wants to open up, and as soon as I take the cup off, it should open up fully. The cup is just holding it closed. Then I'm going to use the male flowers, get the pollen in there, and get the cup back on it. And all that time, you might hear some bees buzzing around here. They're very active right now. I need to make sure none of them gets in the male flower or in the female flower, because if they go in there even for 1 second, then it's open pollinated, which means we don't know where the pollen came from. Before I open up the female, I want to get one male flower ready. You can see a little insect trying to fly around there. Got to protect these. That's a male flower. I'm going to prepare it first by taking the petals off, and just carefully, the more you jostle these flowers, the more the pollen's going to fall off of it. So just do this all very gently and try not to shake it. But what I'm doing, if you can see that, is I'm peeling off the petals, and it peels off quite nicely if you just take your time. And then what you're left with is kind of a paintbrush looking thing. And that's all the pollen, which you can probably see on there. And yeah, I'm going to take this and go into the female with it. Okay, so I'll get in here a little closer if I can, and just take this cup off, and hopefully we'll see the female flower. So that's the open female flower, and then kind of getting in there a little bit, you can see maybe that that's looks like a 5-lobe, maybe that's a 4-lobe flower. Sometimes it's hard to tell, but I'll look a little more closely when I'm not trying to hold the camera too. But the number of lobes is sort of the geometry of the fruit. The lobe turns into where the seeds are formed inside. And I need to get pollen on all of those lobes. Just kind of hold it down in there, and then I'm going to go around. I like to go around the whole thing, keeping the male flower in exactly the same orientation, because that kind of exposes each lobe to some fresh pollen. So this is what I mean by that. I'm just going to go around the outside with it without twisting the male flower. Now I've got pollen all the way around the outside of that, and try to do the same thing on the top a little bit. And after I feel like I've kind of brushed that on there very gently, I'm not using much pressure at all. Then I do one final thing, which is I'll take that flower and just flick it a little bit. Hopefully you can see that okay. Now if we look at the male flower, if I can get it into the camera view, it's a little hard to see, but there's not really much pollen left on it anymore. We managed to get all of it into there. Now I don't use just one flower, I use 3. For this demo I'll just use 2, but I'll show you kind of the whole thing, and hopefully you can see this here. Here's the male flower. You can see it's got nice color. It's starting to open in the morning. It's ready to go in most cases. You can tell when you get it open if it's got a lot of pollen on it, then it's really ready. So I'll do this again. I prefer to do it with 3 male flowers that have good pollen on them. Just kind of brush all the way around and then flick. And when you flick, you want the male flower to be just directly above the female lobes. So that's done. I got the pollen on there. I use my male flowers, like I prefer 3 of them, and then just very gently coax these petals. This is a big flower, so it doesn't really want to go in there, but just coax the petals in there very gently, and then twist the cup a little bit. Don't use much pressure because the stem and the pumpkin is very brittle at this point. You could end up cracking it off, but I twist the cup on a little bit, and as I'm pushing it down, and make sure none of the petals are catching. You'll feel it gets a little tight on there, and because it's kind of tight against the petals, I don't think there's any way any insects could get in there right now. And that's it. This cup will stay on here really until tomorrow. It all happens in one day, and then I usually take the cup off at that point. You'll find the flower looks more like this at that point. It's done, it's spent, and it's all kind of fused together and everything. This is a male flower, of course, but the female will look like this tomorrow. And I got it labeled. That's in my notebook. I know what plant this is on. I know what pollen I used on it. And then down the road, I won't lose track of that information. Well, that concludes my pollination demo for today. Nice sunny morning here out in the pumpkin patch. And I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. If you have any comments, please feel free to send them my way.